What's up guys, I'm Sega Lord X, and in this episode we're going to be looking at part 2 of our Sega Ages coverage. Now, if the Sega Ages line on the Saturn was anything, it was diverse. In this particular lot of games, we're going to see RPGs, we're going to see platformers, we're going to see puzzle games, and we're going to get more super scalers. All in all, Sega Ages on the Saturn was a great series of games, and this lot here was pretty damn good. Let's take a look. October of 1997 would see the release of Columns Arcade Collection. Containing 4 Arcade Columns games in one package, this one here actually isn't a terrible value if you have any fondness for the series. You get the traditional Columns, with its basic dual match gameplay and familiar music. Columns 2 with its really fun and challenging Flash Columns mode. Columns 97 with its updated pre-rendered 3D sprites. And finally Stat Columns with its AI battles and new twists on gameplay. There is enough here for puzzle fans to warrant a look, although the presentation of most of these games takes absolutely no advantage of the Saturn's hardware. Only Columns 97's superior color palette shows any kind of 32-bit connection, but the gameplay remains virtually identical to the original game. Columns 2 is definitely my favorite of the bunch, as Flash Columns mode can be extremely addictive. It's a game that most of you can pass on with no trouble, but for the rest of you that may have interest, it's Columns, so you know exactly what to expect. The very next month in November of 1997, Sega Ages Memorial Selection Volume 2 was released. Following the first game's lead and including a number of classic Sega arcade ports, we'd see 6 games in this collection. First is 1979's Samurai, and boy is this one a throwback. Despite the simple presentation, the gameplay here is actually surprisingly deep for a game this old. You can block attacks with your sword, as well as move around your enemies to counterattack. It's tough though, and likely will be played once and never again. We also get 1979's Monaco GP, an overhead racing game with a good amount of speed and challenge. Although simple in design, this one isn't bad at all for a session of Twitch gameplay. Up next is 1983's Starjacker, a vertical shooter that I absolutely hate. This was from the era where shoot-em-ups gave you pea shooters to defend yourself, and I absolutely despised it. 1983 would also give us Sinbad Mystery, an overhead collectathon that has you avoiding enemies and collecting treasure. Stages get hard fast, and you have a tendency to get caught on the corners of the maze, causing a ton of frustration. 1985 gives up one of the better games on the disc, Doki Doki Penguin Land. Try and get your egg home through progressively harder stages and enemies. It looks simple as hell, but steady difficulty keeps the game challenging in nearly every stage. 1985 was a good year for Sega, because we also got Ninja Princess, the source material for the Sega Master System run-and-gun classic, The Ninja. You play a princess that needs no man to save her, kicking ass across an overhead vertically scrolling playfield. This one is fast, colorful, and challenging, and is nearly worth the purchase of this disc alone. February of 1998 would bring us one of the best additions to this series, Power Drift. This superscalar classic hit home for the very first time on a Sega console, and was extremely close to the arcade original. Its unique look and feel is unlike any other game Sega released in this mold. The pseudo 3D effect was simply out of this world at the time of its release in 1988, providing a convincing amount of depth for this type of rendering. The gameplay was unique as hell too, feeling more like a roller coaster ride than a racing game. Make no mistake, however, there is plenty of challenge and depth here, and you'll need to put in some practice to master it. Power Drift has seen a number of home ports to various other consoles and computers before the Saturn release, but this version here was something special in 1998, and I still highly recommend you pick it up if you are a racing fan. It doesn't have the 60 frames per second of the arcade original, but the frame rate is rock solid all the same. The Saturn has a great library of the genre, and this one belongs among the ranks of its best. In April of 1998, Sega released Phantasy Star Collection for the Sega Saturn. I was so incredibly excited for this release, as I am a huge Phantasy Star fan and was very much looking forward to owning them all in one place and on one disc. Surely Sega would include the English text as an option, seeing as how all 4 of these games had an English release, right? Wrong. These games are Japanese text only, gutting me completely. Instead of belly aching about how great this looks on Saturn and how badly I wanted it in English, I'll simply show you the included Japanese commercials for each game. They're damn near worth the price of admission by themselves.
セガはロールプレイングゲームも変えてしまう。ファンタシースター。かつてない驚異のグラフィック。壮大な SF ストーリー。その秘密は4メガ。ファンタシースター。16ビット6メガ。セガファンタシースター2。目を見張りリアルキャラクター。ツインスクロール。メガドライブ対応未体験ロールプレイングゲーム。ファンタシースター2。時を司るのは神か悪魔か。1本で4つのエンディング。キングオブ RPG。時の継承者ファンタシースター3。
July of 1998 would bring one of the more disappointing releases in the series, Galaxy Force 2. This superscaler had been an absolute tour de force of graphical awesomeness on the Sega Y arcade board, and I had high hopes that the Saturn version would retain the game's look and feel, especially after the great ports of previous superscalers like Space Harrier and Power Drift. It wasn't meant to be, however, as this version suffers major frame rate drops during the entire game. Like Power Drift, the frame rate here needed to be cut to 30 frames per second to get everything running smoothly, but very much unlike Power Drift, we get slowdown on top of that. It makes for fairly choppy gameplay, which can be distracting as hell. That doesn't mean it's a terrible game though, and still looks good for what it is. Lots of enemies fill the convincing 3D environment with death and destruction, and I especially like the base sections that are Death Star-like finishers. There are many better versions of this game on more modern hardware, so you have options should the interest hit you. The Saturn game here is definitely a letdown, but you can do far worse on the system. We'd see the last game in the Sega Ages line in October of 1998. I Love Mickey Mouse and I Love Donald Duck was released as a compilation of the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive platforming classics, Castle of Illusion and Quackshot. Most of you know these two games extremely well, and have probably heard me proclaim my love for them in past episodes. They represent some of the best exclusive Disney content for any Sega platform, and still play great today. Nothing here has been retouched, with only the Saturn's superior video output giving the game any improvement. Castle of Illusion looks and sounds just how you remember it, You control Mickey on his quest to rescue Minnie from the evil clutches of the witch Mizrabel. Timeless game design reigns supreme here, as Castle of Illusion is as playable today as it was in 1990. Fun boss battles, great set pieces, and tried and true Sega magic make this one a truly great experience. Not to be outdone, Quackshot was a hell of a ride itself. This one isn't as straightforward as Mickey's adventure was, as the game design allowed backtracking and upgrades that expanded areas you had already been to. It was the perfect evolution of gameplay, forcing the player to think about how to play each stage and proceed to the next. Donald would gain abilities that would allow him to dispatch foes more efficiently as the game progressed, and once you understood how to play it, it was nearly as good as Castle of Illusion. Sega Ages on the Saturn went out with a bang with this one, and although I dreamed of many more games than we actually got, I'm glad we did see the classics we did. Alright guys, Sega Ages on the Sega Saturn. Now, as we know, this series would die with the machine. In 1998, the Saturn goes down in flames, and pretty much all of its software with it. So we really did get an unfortunate cutting short of the potential of this particular series. We never saw Outrunners for it. We never saw Golden Axe, The Revenge of Death Adder. We didn't see a ton of other Sega games that could have easily fit right into this series. Now fortunately, the games we got weren't bad at all. In my opinion, some of the super scalers here are must-owns for the system, if not the best versions of those particular games available. You should definitely look into them. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you next time.